We all know that the Fire Nation has a special connection to the Avatar, and that is not always due to good reasons. As we know, Avatar Roku and Fire Lord Sozin were thick as thieves, sharing a bond akin to brothers. But just as was the story of Cain and Abel, Sozin betrayed his brother for his own gain. His desire to, in more flowery words than this, conquer the world was not a concept that Roku agreed with. And when Roku found that Sozin had gone along with the plan anyway, a wedge so deep that it lasted for many years was formed. And this lasted until Roku's death on his island when a volcano erupted. To be honest, Sozin didn't kill Roku, but he certainly didn't help when he could have. And when Roku died, the next in the Avatar cycle was born. A baby boy born to airbenders. Let's see where this what if takes our friend Aang. Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. The Amagi's reach stretches beyond just this channel, so if you're a fan of us, please consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all of our social media. Help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. So, for this what if, I'm going to suppose that Sozin's comet, at this time, though it wasn't called that, it was just called Comet, a decade earlier at around the age of Aang's birth. Of course, Sozin's plan is to eradicate the airbenders. This would wipe out the Avatar cycle for good. My question is why he didn't wipe out the waterbenders instead. As Roku dies, his next incarnation is born. He wouldn't be wiping out the Avatar cycle, he would just ensure that there will be at least 3 more generations of Avatars before the end. But I digress. So in this what if, the timetable for the Airbenders' extinction is pushed up by 10 years and Avatar Aang is still just that chubby, smiling little infant. Sozin comes in and slaughters them all just as he had before, however Aang is still there. Sozin would find the baby hidden by Gyatso in his quarters. Sozin would pick up baby Aang and look at him. Sozin decided to kill Aang, but before he could, memories of his past with Roku came flooding back. It is then that Sozin realizes he can't do it. The baby laughs as if it recognized a friend. Sozin finds himself unable to kill the infant Avatar, but he does not mind. He has an epiphany. The Avatar was never his enemy. The duty belonging to the Avatar is taught. That is his enemy. Roku fell from grace because those who taught him trained to be more loyal to their teachings than his home nation. However, if Sozin were to raise this child and teach it to value its nation first and foremost, then he would have gained access to the most powerful bender in the world. And so he takes Aang back to the Fire Nation with him. There he raises Aang in the castle along with Azulon, who Aang sees as a little brother. Aang would be 10 years older than Prince Azulon. The truth about who Aang is and where he came from would be kept a secret. In fact, Sozin would merely inform Aang that he is Sozin and his wife's child, the older brother of Azulon. Aang would be raised to believe that the Fire Nation is the greatest in the world and would be trained every day in firebending, hoping to become the weapon he was meant by Sozin to be. At this time, the war was in full swing, and Aang would come to see it play out right before his eyes. It wouldn't be long until Sozin had a rude awakening. Aang would inform him of some odd dreams he's had. At night, he dreams that a man comes to see him, an elderly man with white hair, bearing the crown prince headpiece sitting on the edge of his bed, and saying things to him that Aang couldn't understand. Sozin would curse Roku. Even from beyond the grave, he was still standing against him and threatening his plans. He had to do something about this, and he had to do it soon. Sozin began to weigh the possibilities. One night, while Aang is sleeping, he senses something strange. He wakes up to find 4 masked men in his room attempting to kill him. Aang rolls up onto his hands and jumps to his headboard as 4 fists unleash a blast of fire that burns up his bed. From here, Aang would kick off his headboard using his movements to create a wave of fire that would attempt to consume the intruders, but they would knock it away. They would attempt to give Aang no relief by pressing their attack, but Aang wasn't looking for relief, he was still moving, attempting to escape. He would stumble through the door and into the main halls. There would be no one there to protect him. He'd take a blow to the back of the head and nearly go out. There he lay as they would gather around for a final strike. Aang's eyes would begin to glow as he would release a concussive blast of air. Aang would rise and the 4 firebenders would take a few steps back to assess the situation. Sozin had said nothing of this. In that moment, 10,000 years worth of bending knowledge is forced through Aang's being. He speaks with the voice of many people as he warns the firebenders. The benders would soon realize the truth that this kid was somehow the Avatar. They were unsure of what to do. They were never told that their target was the Avatar, which creates a bunch of questions for the assassins, who then proceed to flee. Aang would drop out of his Avatar state and hit the ground. Confused and startled, he would have many questions, such as who tried to kill him and why. He would tell this to Sozin, who would feign ignorance, but he would know that the assassins had failed and fled. So he would hire assassins to assassinate the assassins, and then would attempt to assassinate Aang with a new type of assassination that left little room to fail at assassinating Aang. The next day at supper, Sozin plans to put poison in Aang's food, something that would work slowly and appear to act something akin to appendicitis to make it seem like a natural death. However, after eating the food, he begins to feel the effects that night. Sozin's wife, the woman who Aang would call mother, would walk into his room. She would have been moved with guilt and would have admitted that Aang had become part of the family. She would sit on the edge of his bed and explain to him what was going on. She would explain that Sozin had been attempting to kill him because of his bad dreams. Aang would ask what it means and why his father would want to kill him just because of bad dreams. Aang's adopted mother would tell him that it meant he was the Avatar, and she would identify the man in his dreams as former Avatar Roku. She would give Aang the antidote to the poison and help him pack. She would tell him that he needed to leave as quickly as possible. Aang would understandably be shaken, but she would give him a kiss on the head and apologize for not saying anything sooner. She would admit to cowardice, and Aang would quickly forgive her. She would vow to him to never betray him like that again and remind him that no matter where he went, she would always love him. Aang would then make his way out into the night. As Aang would flee, he'd be unsure of what to do. He still wasn't sure why his father was trying to kill him just because of his dreams. That is when Avatar Roku would appear to Aang. Roku would then start to explain his history with Sozin as well as the duty of the Avatar. He would inform Aang that he needs to bring balance and stop Sozin, but Aang said no. Roku would be confused and Aang would state that he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to stand against his father. Roku would tell him the truth. Aang was born an air nomad and Sozin had eradicated them all but Aang. Aang told Roku that he knew. He mentioned how he was told about the warmongering air nomads. This struck a nerve in Roku, who snapped at Aang and told him that it was but a lie. Roku would calm down after a moment and admit that it wasn't Aang's fault. He'd been indoctrinated. The only thing Roku could think to do was show Aang. Take Aang home. Aang would go on a journey to the southern air temple. To get there, he would need to climb, and there was no other way to get there except by flying bison. Aang would eventually reach the top, and Roku would explain to him what had happened. He would point out that there wasn't a single weapon in sight. He would show that the only users of weapons were the firebenders. Roku would continue to plead his case. He'd say that the reason why the air nomads were eradicated was for the simple reason that Aang was born to them. Aang was the avatar of the air nomads, and was the one who would bring balance. Sozin feared him and planned to destroy him, but upon finding him, he decided to make him a weapon to further his plans. Aang then struggled with the belief that his father never truly loved him and merely humored him in hopes of making a weapon out of him. Aang would ask for time alone. Roku would oblige and leave Aang for a while, telling him that if Aang needed him, he wouldn't be far. Aang would wander the halls of the temple, looking at the architecture and artwork throughout. It was beautiful, and by looking at it, he realized that the air nomads were simple people. People who had discarded most earthly possessions. They were not warmongering types. Aang found himself sitting alone on a ledge, looking down and processing everything. "What do I do now?" Aang would ask, as his head would turn back to face the spirit of Roku. "Master the elements," Roku would say. "Only a fully realized avatar can return balance to the world." Aang would ask him how he's even supposed to master airbending. There are no airbenders left to teach him. Roku would smile. "You already have everything you need inside of you." Then he would disappear, leaving Aang alone to try and figure out what he means. He would eventually find himself a room where he would go to sleep. Sometime during the night, he'd be awakened by someone. Aang's eyes would widen when he saw a female airbender there. At first, he was startled and begged for his life, but she would laugh and tell him to be calm. She identified herself as Yang Chen, the last air nomad avatar before Aang. She would tell him that she would teach him, show him how to master airbending. She warned him it would not be easy, but knew he had it in him to learn. From here, she would begin to go through the motions, teaching him from the ground up. It was far harder for him to learn this, considering that his teacher was incorporeal, but she remained patient with him. She was unlike any teacher he had ever had. She was kind, patient, and encouraging. It was astonishing to him. His firebending teachers were strict, angry, and almost abusive. The contrast between the two cultures and methods of teaching were world-opening. He eventually managed to get a handle of airbending. He had far from mastered it, but he picked it up quickly, almost like it was what he was meant to be. Then again, he was. Yang Chen would guide him through the temple to a room that could only be opened by airbenders. She would tell Aang to mind his training and attempt to open the door. He would have some issues at first, but he would eventually manage to open it. Aang would step through and look around, seeing many statues lining the walls and floors. Yang Chen would explain that this room and its statues were dedicated to every avatar in recorded history. She would show some to him and give Aang a lesson on their history. He'd smile when he saw Roku and Yang Chen. He would then point to the two between them and ask who they were. Yang Chen would then state that it was Avatar Kuruk and Avatar Kyoshi, the Water Tribe Avatar and the Earth Nation Avatar, respectively. She would inform Aang that this showed the next steps in his training. He needed to master Water and Earth next. Before leaving, she told Aang that there was one last gift from the air nomads. She sent him out and had him wait. He would wait for days, it seemed. That was until a flying bison did appear. Yang Chen told him the bison had chosen him, and in response, Aang named it Appa. Together, Aang would fly from the temple. Yeah, he screamed a lot. He had never gone flying before, and this was quite a shock. Given Aang's notoriety, he would decide that the best place to train for waterbending would be the Southern Water Tribe. After all, Aang was considered to be the son of Sozin, so it might be problematic for the Prince of the Fire Nation to show up in Water Tribe territory. Once he reached the Southern Water Tribe, he sought someone to teach him, but few seemed interested. That was when Yang Chen informed him that all he needed was already within him. Aang would know what that meant, having heard it before. So he would find a place warm enough and go to sleep. He slept through the whole night without being awakened. He woke the next day to see a man wearing a white pelt around his head. Aang would immediately recognize him. "Kuruk," Aang would simply say. Kuruk would nod. "Aang," he would respond. Aang would get incredibly excited and await his first bit of training. The first order took Aang by surprise. Go to Kyoshi Island. Aang would be confused by this. He assumed he would learn waterbending while in the Water Tribe. But Kuruk insisted. So Aang took Appa and flew to Kyoshi Island. Kuruk would sigh and state that it was great to be back in the Earth Kingdom. Aang was still confused and asked for his first step in training. Kuruk would tell him that step 1 was to go into the nearest village and find a man carrying an object covered in a tarp. He instructed Aang to buy the object without even asking a question, and so Aang followed these orders. Bringing it back, he'd open it up. It's a surfboard," Aang would say. He would look to Kuruk and ask him how this would help. Kuruk told him to just slow his roll and enjoy his time here. Kyoshi Island was a beautiful island, full of beautiful girls and beautiful waves. He should enjoy himself a little. Aang would want to protest this, but Kuruk would tell him that he had been training non-stop with Yang Chen for months and needed a vacation. Aang would nod and follow orders. Together, Kuruk and Aang would go surfing, practically all day, every day, and when not surfing, he was trying to teach Aang how to properly flirt with girls. Aang failed almost every time and would end up being laughed at by the girls, but at least he tried. Kuruk asked if he had any tricks that could get attention. Aang would then pull 2 marbles out and begin to spin them with airbending. Kuruk would tell him that he still had a long way to go. For weeks and close to months, Kuruk would have Aang surfing. It took him a long while to get used to it. Eventually, a typhoon would come to the coast. The waves were churning and crashing, and yet Kuruk started telling him to go surfing. "Are you crazy? I'll be killed," Aang would shout, but nonetheless, Kuruk insisted. He said that if he could just get over his nerves, he would have the time of his life. Kuruk would then point over to show that there were girls watching. "Go on, if you surf in this, they'll go crazy for you." Aang would gulp and nod. He would try, and he was having quite a bit of fun. The waves were massive, and he had found that he had never seen such beauty than the inside of a wave as it began to crash over him. A tunnel of blue with light filtering through. He came out of it and would feel as though he were on top of the world. But he wasn't. He was on top of a wave. That wave then crashed, and Aang with it. Aang would wash up on shore to see the girls were gone. He would get very frustrated. Kuruk told him he had done well. Aang would look up and snap at him. What am I even doing here? I'm supposed to be mastering waterbending, but instead all you want me to do is flirt and surf. When are you going to teach me waterbending? Kuruk would then shake his head. You've been learning it the whole time. Kuruk would inform him. The surfing, the flirting with girls, it's all going with the flow and learning about attracting forces. Things that pull us together and push us apart, and how to adapt with the situation. To be fluid, like water. You've been subconsciously waterbending the whole time. How do you think you survived some of those waves? Aang would be surprised. Kuruk would bring him to the edge of the sea and show him. Start following my movements. Kuruk would make movements and Aang would follow those movements and notice that the waves were dancing along with them. He felt as if the sea were an extension of himself. Kuruk would smile. See, training doesn't always have to suck. It can still be fun. And for the next week or so, Kuruk would show him the basic movements. Waterbending mastered. Remaining on Kyoshi Island, Aang would eventually find that Kuruk was gone as easily as he had come. Then came Kyoshi. Aang would start off by asking if she came here often. Kyoshi would say that it was a mistake to let Kuruk train Aang. She would tell him that his earthbending would begin now. She would focus on physical training for Aang. She would not spare him. He would basically be begging to have Kuruk back. She would show him how weak he had gotten in his time off and have him working like there was no tomorrow, lifting heavy stones. She would treat him roughly in hopes that he would buck up to her. He was normally level-headed but passive, and she was trying to evoke more outbursts like he had against Kuruk. The longer it took him to get angry, the more weight she would force him to lift. And the more struggle he had lifting, the more she would insult him. It wasn't personal, and she didn't care much for insulting him, but she was attempting to teach him. Earthbending was all about strength, physical, spiritual, and emotional. Stone was the most stubborn of all elements, and it required a will just as stubborn to move it. The greater the stone, the greater the will required to move it. But slowly, Aang began to pick it up. He started to understand it. It took time for him to learn, given it was the opposite to airbending, the element Aang was born to use. However, due to being raised in the Fire Nation, Aang would have more traits for a firebender than an airbender, and that meant that he could get a grasp on it faster. Firebenders were strong-willed themselves, which ironically would make them perfect earthbenders if only they were born with that element. After about 6 months, Aang would have finally gotten a good grasp on earthbending. He would have finally mastered all 4 elements, but there was still one last thing he needed to do, and that was master the Avatar state. It was then that Yang Chen would return to him. She would commend him on his progress. She would then inform him of the best way to master the Avatar state, which meant opening his chakras. She warned him that it would be rough, and once started he would have to finish. If he didn't finish, his Avatar state would remain locked to him. Aang agreed to it. Yang Chen then told him to mix up something special, to grab bananas and onions. When he made it, he would note that it smelled horrible and asked where on his body he should apply it. She would then tell him he had to drink it. Aang would then realize how hard his training would be. Yang Chen would work to help him open his chakras, starting from the bottom up. He would start with the Chakra of Earth, located at the base of the spine. She said that this chakra dealt with survival and was blocked by fear. She asked what Aang was afraid of. Aang would mention how many times he had come close to death, the 4 assassins, the poisoning, and even flying on Appa's back. She would inform him to clear his thoughts. Aang would, and slowly what he feared began to fall away. Yang Chen would then move on to the next chakra, the Chakra of Water, located in the sacrum. It dealt with pleasure and was blocked by guilt. She would ask him what he felt guilty for. He would mention that because he was born to the air nomads, Sozin came and killed them all. Yang Chen would tell Aang to accept that this happened and that he could not change it. It wasn't Aang's fault for being born. If anything, it was Sozin's fault for attempting to destroy the balance. Letting his feelings of guilt go, Aang opened the second chakra. Yang Chen would move on to the fire chakra, located in the stomach. It dealt with willpower and was blocked by shame. When asked what he was ashamed of, he said it was because he believed the air nomads were the ones at fault during the genocide, and that he had yet to apologize to Yang Chen for it. She informed him that there was no reason to apologize for misinformation, and by allowing himself to be corrected, he had made it right. Nonetheless, she accepted his apology, and his third chakra was opened. Then came the fourth chakra, the Chakra of Air. It dealt with love and was blocked by grief. Aang would see his father, Sozin. He saw all the times they played together. Piggyback rides, playing in the sea and on the sand, his first time seeing fireworks. All these memories faded away like smoke as he saw the 4 assassins appear and felt the pain of the poison. Yang Chen admitted that such a thing would hurt, and should. For a child to learn that their father no longer loved them, or perhaps never loved them, was something that they should never have to bear. but she implored him to remember that the woman he called mother had put herself at risk to deliver the antidote and help him escape the castle. He was loved. Aang would wipe some of his tears away and let out a sigh. Yang Chen would move to the 5th chakra, the chakra of sound. It was located in the throat and dealt with truth and was obscured by lies, specifically the lies we tell ourselves. Aang mentioned that the lie he had told himself was that what the Fire Nation was doing was good, and using that as an excuse to forget that people were dying so Sozin could obtain power. Aang finally accepted that he had been on the wrong side, and with that his chakra was opened. Then was chakra number 6, the light chakra, which was located in the forehead. It dealt with insight and was hindered by illusion. Yang Chen explained to Aang that not everything was as separated as it seemed. There were 4 elements, but they weren't always a different thing. Everything was the same. It was all nature, down to the smallest level. Every element was made of the same thing. Oxygen, carbon, hydrogen. It was all made of the same building blocks. Then came the final chakra, the chakra of thought, located at the crown of the head. It dealt with pure cosmic energy and was held back by earthly attachments. When asked what attached him to the earth, he saw the image of his father, the belief that he might once more return and be accepted, as well as the love of his mother. He would see a vision and feel that his mother had died protecting him. Yang Chen would warn Aang not to let his chakras close due to his emotional disturbance. She told him that he was the Avatar, and his duty was not to be accepted, but to protect people regardless of what he desired. His existence was purely selfless, to serve, to protect those who had no protection. They were needed to experience these things and life to have a greater desire to protect it, but that was not to stop them from being able to let it go. While an avatar could truly never detach, they needed to detach from some things. Not to count to either side of the balance, but to be the fulcrum. And to do that, he needed to be disengaged from his attachments, including his own desires for the greater good. When asked if he could kill Sozin if needed, Aang thought for a moment and realized all the things that Sozin had done and was still doing. Aang affirmed himself that there was another way, perhaps a way to talk Sozin down. Yang Chen told him that that was not the question she had asked. She asked him once more, saying, if all of that fails, and you can't talk him down, can you kill Sozin? Aang would reluctantly nod and say that he could. And in that moment, his chakra was open, and the avatar state was opened to him. Upon doing this, Yang Chen congratulated that Aang had finally become a fully realized avatar. She told him that it was his duty to return to the Fire Nation and deal with Sozin. Aang agreed, but before he did go, he wished to return to the Southern Air Temple. Hopping aboard Appa, he would fly back to the Southern Air Temple. There, he would find an air nomad's gi and a glider. He would shave his head in preparation for facing his father to represent the air nomads he was born to. He would then return to the Fire Nation. He would make his way inside the castle and meet his father in the throne room. Sozin would look at him and immediately know what he was there for. Revenge then? Roku told you who you were, and now you're here for revenge. Avatar Aang would shake his head. No, I'm here to stop you from hurting anyone else. They would speak more. Aang would tell him that he never planned to betray him and that it was Sozin's actions that drove him to this. Sozin would respond that whether he called himself Aang, Roku, Kyoshi, or anyone else, he was still the same person. Roku betrayed him. It was only a matter of time before Aang did too. Aang would reply that the only one who betrayed Sozin was himself. They would begin to fight. Aang would continue to try to talk to Sozin. He told him that all he ever did was love him. He never wanted to stop him, and he never wanted to rule the world. He just wanted to be loved by his father. Sozin would exclaim that he was never his father. He was his killer. Sozin had killed Roku and had eradicated the air nomads. And at that moment, Aang got a distinct feeling. Was it possible that Sozin was feeling guilty about it? Sozin looked to Aang and told him he killed his mother for betraying him. This made Aang look away, tears falling from his eyes. He looked up and saw that Sozin also had tears falling from his stern face. Aang spoke. I still love you, he said. Sozin was befuddled. How can you love me after everything I've done? Aang mentioned that he did not care that Sozin had killed him when he was Roku. He didn't care that he had tried to kill Aang himself twice. He forgave him. And even though Sozin had killed the air nomads and had killed his mother, he still loved Sozin. He begged Sozin to stop the war, to stop the killing, but he shook his head and said it was far too late to turn back. Aang exclaimed to him that it was not, and that he could right now make the decision to save the world, to be a hero, to bring balance to the world just as Roku and Aang wanted. He told him it wasn't too late to be a family again. Perhaps Sozin's wife was gone, but he still had Azulon and Aang if he would choose them. He told Sozin that if this truly were for the world and its prosperity, that he would stop trying to destroy everything. Aang would drop his staff and hug Sozin. "Please, stop this war. I want to come home. I want us to be a family again. Don't make me kill my own father, please." Sozin had reached his breaking point. He couldn't do it anymore. He had carried the guilt of what he had done to his best friend for years, and in killing his wife for betrayal, he had reopened that wound. He was perhaps the most powerful man in the world ever since the comet that had bared his name came passing through, and he wasn't any happier. He longed for the days where he and Roku would spar and talk about their dreams, about their crushes, about the future. He wondered what had become of himself if Roku had not left him to train to become a fully realized avatar. Sozin hugged his son back. "Aang, I'm sorry. Roku, I'm sorry," he shouted as he fell to his knees with Aang in his arms. Over Aang's shoulder, Roku would appear with a smile as he looked to his old friend and disappeared. As if on cue, Aang would speak, "I forgive you." From here, what I see happening is that Sozin would officially abdicate the throne. He would feel the weight had become too much and feel unworthy of it. He would officially announce Aang, despite his wishes, as the next Fire Lord. Aang would not hold the title long, however, merely 20 years. After the death of Sozin, Aang himself would abdicate the throne at age 30. He would return it to Azulon, whom he had been grooming for a while, teaching him the proper way to rule with care and love. He would then go and visit the northern, southern, western, and eastern air temples to try and get as much information about the culture that was nearly lost forever. Upon doing so, he and his wife would make their home there. Eventually, they would have their firstborn child, a son whom they named Tenzin. This is what I think would happen. After all, we know that in the original timeline, Sozin died a shell of himself, as Zuko deduced from discovering his last will and testament. Sozin likely carried much grief, discovering that his plans for the future of the planet had not been worth the loss of his best friend. It makes me think that if Sozin ever managed to take Aang in, he would reach this conclusion as well. Aang was a character full of love, a pacifist at heart, not just because he was an air nomad, but because he was actually full of kindness. I can hardly see Aang killing Sozin unless absolutely necessary. And that's only if he were raised in the Fire Nation. As a nomad, there would be almost zero chance that Aang would purposefully choose to kill Sozin. He couldn't kill Ozai even when he had the chance, and he indeed had the chance when he turned Ozai's lightning on him. This is just how I feel like it would play out. I'm certain you all have differing opinions on the events that would follow, but honestly, whether this is exactly what would happen or not, I had immense fun telling this story, and I hope you enjoyed listening to it. If you liked it, please make sure to click that like button and give us a subscription if you haven't already. We would really appreciate that. Make sure to click the bell if you want to see more of our content as it comes out. Just as Aang would want me to, I'll leave you with this word. Peace.